Welcome back to the Mandarin Blueprint podcast. My name is Phil Crimmins. This is episode 71, and we have a lot to cover today. There are plenty of new questions that came in, lots of good comments. But first, before we get into anything too deep in the content, we've had some people recently ask us about the idea of offering referrals for the Mandarin Blueprint method. So if you're in the Mandarin Blueprint method and you refer somebody, maybe we give you a free month or something like that. And this is something that we would love to do, but the problem is that the functionality of the video course platform we have doesn't have that. It's actually quite complicated to give somebody a free month as opposed to just giving them a commission. So that's why we've created the Mandarin Blueprint affiliate link. And so I've left it in the show notes right at the top where it will say, become a Mandarin Blueprint affiliate, which will take you to our website, to a page that explains how it works. And essentially all it is that if somebody signs up for the course using your link, then we'll give you a percentage of the sale. I can't remember whether it's 20 or 30%, but that'll give you something like, especially if they buy, for example, the annual subscription, that would be more than covering a month of your time in terms of monetary value. So if you're interested in helping us out by spreading the word about the course, but you'd like to get some return for your referral, then you can do that by becoming an affiliate through our website. So you just sign up on the website and then you get a link that you can send to people. So hopefully if anybody's interested in that, you can check that out in the show notes below. Right below that in the show notes is a link to leave us a review on Google. We've always had Facebook reviews since we started our company, but we never had Google reviews until recently. So Google Business Review is really helpful for a company like ours. It's a small startup to get the word out and get some recognition in terms of quality, because of course those of you on the course know how good the course is, how effective it is at getting you to learn characters quickly, learn your pronunciation, learn the different aspects of grammar through comprehensible input. And so we just need to keep getting the word out there. So a Google review is really helpful for that. And so if you can check that out, the link below just says leave us a Google Business Review. So if you have a few extra seconds to leave us a star review or maybe type out a couple of sentences, that would be really excellent, and we'd appreciate it as always. So, just like last week when Luke went into a grammar point during the podcast that is also going to go into the course platform, I'm going to do the same thing today with a very simple grammar point that comes up as you go through the course. Now, as a reminder, the way we're going to do this is, and I'll explain a little bit about the theory here, because grammar is acquired through comprehensible input, it doesn't actually make sense to learn a grammar point before you've seen anything that has that grammar structure. So for example, if you haven't ever seen any sentence that uses ma at the end of the sentence to indicate a yes or no question, then there's no point in learning about it yet. Just try to understand several sentences that have ma, and then go, hey, by the way, have you noticed that these sentences that you already knew and already have come into contact with and understood the meaning, they all have this common structure. So that's how we're going to do it. We're going to basically introduce a grammar structure in a kind of like, hey, look at what you already know type of way, as opposed to we're going to teach this to you before you understand it and then hope that you get it from there. So what we're going to do today, when you reach the sentence 我的儿子吓呆了 in level 13, that is the 10th or 11th or around 10 times that you've seen the d character indicating possession. And this is one of the most simple grammar points in the entire language. And so what we've done with this is we've created a tag that you can find in Anki that says GW, which stands for grammar word. Then we have helper possession. And then we have the Chinese, which is 助词. 助词literally means help word. So that's why we call it a helper. And then d indicates possession, so we put possession. So with all of the grammar word tags, that's how the structure works. So you have GW, grammar word. The alternatives are GS, which is grammar structure, or GE, which is grammar element, something like a noun or an adjective or an adverb. And so we say, okay, grammar word, helper. So instead of saying particle, which is the grammatical way of explaining what a 助词is in like official translated grammatical language, we'll call it a helper because that's a much better way of translating the idea of help word. It's a helper. And then de indicates possession. So we have GW, helper, possession, 助词, de. And by clicking that tag in Anki, you'll see every sentence that has that structure in the first 5 phases of the course, which is really phases 3 through 5. That's when we start introducing sentences. Now, as I mentioned, in this lesson, 我的儿子吓呆了. That is about the 10th time that you've seen this idea of de indicating possession, and this is the most common way that you'll see it as a part of the subject, or what we like to call the host of the sentence. So instead of calling something a subject, which is a grammatical word, we'll call it the host. It's like the host, and that's the reason why we call it that is because in Chinese, the word for subject in grammar, in sort of grammar vocabulary, is 主语, 主语, and that means literally like master or host language, right? So 语 is language in all of the different grammar elements all end in 语. And so 主语 is the way we talk about a subject. And so 我的儿子. 儿子 is the subject. 我的儿子 is the type of subject. So it's not just son, it's my son. And then the rest is whatever comes next in the sentence. So in this case, it's 我的儿子吓呆了, scared senseless. So once you've established the subject, then by adding the de, you're just making it clear where the possession is. But it can also be the object. The possession can exist in either the subject or the object or in any part of the sentence. So we have the next sentence is 我早上骂了我的儿子. So the subject of that sentence is 我, right? It's saying I scolded my son this morning, and my son 我的儿子. That falls into the object of the sentence, which again, we don't like to say object, we prefer to say guest, because again, in Chinese, just like how 主语 means host, 宾语 means guest. That 宾语, that literally means guest language. So that's what we'll call objects in a sentence. So you have the basic structure of subject, verb, object. We like to think of that as host does what, guest, because usually a verb with a subject, verb, object is what is the subject doing, and then the guest is usually receiving the action of the subject, right? So 我早上骂了我的儿子 is an example of the de, the possession going into the object part of the sentence. Sometimes it can get abstract. So one of the sentences you've seen before is 我明白你说的话. 我明白你说的话. So here, the de is between 说, to speak, and 话, words, the noun for my words. So the sentence could say 我明白你的话. That would be okay, but by saying 你说的话, you're making it clearer that it's specifically spoken words. It's not written words. It could have been another way, or it could have been, something abstract in the past by saying 我明白你说的话. You're making it clear that it was what you said. I understood exactly what you said, and ultimately it's still the possession of 你. But by saying 说的话, you're making it clear that it's specifically the spoken type of 话 that you understood. Now, in the next lesson, you're going to see an example of de that is a bit more abstract. So the sentence here is 桌子上的勺子是你的吗? So we have actually two de in this sentence, but 桌子上的勺子, it is the spoon that belongs to the top of the table. So you could think of it like if you're looking at a table and there's lots of stuff on it, anything on there could come after 桌子上的, because what we're basically saying is that it belongs to the table. Everything on the table belongs to the table. So you could have a glass on the table. 桌子上的杯子. You could have a notebook on the table. 桌子上的笔记本, right? And all of these different things that are on the table, the way Chinese frames it is as if they belong to the table, right? And they're on top of it. Now, if I said 桌子下的笔记本 or 桌子下的勺子, I'd be saying the things below the table, the things that belong to below the table if they're under the table or whatever. So usually you would say something like maybe 东西, which is the word for stuff. So you could just say 桌子下的东西请打扫打扫. So that would be like the stuff under the table, the stuff that belongs to under the table, please clean it up, right? And then we also have a second 的 in this sentence. So we have 桌子上的勺子是你的吗?桌子上的勺子是你的吗? And that last 你的, you'll notice that it ends right there at 的. There's nothing after it except for the ma, but the ma doesn't belong to 你的, so the ma is indicating a yes or no question. So what is being omitted here is saying the word 勺子 a second time. You don't need to say it twice, right? So another way to say this sentence would be 桌子上的勺子是你的勺子吗?桌子上的勺子是你的勺子吗? Right? And that would be repetitive. You don't need to say 勺子 twice. So because the context lets you know that 勺子 is in the sentence already, you can omit it the second time. So does the spoon on the table belong to you? Well, the second time that you say, you're indicating possession with 你的, you don't need to include 勺子 again. So that is the grammar tag GW helper possession 助词的. So if you want to see more sentences like that, go into Anki, look in the sidebar, and find that tag. Then you can click it and you can see all the sentences that have the possession particle or helper 的. Next, we'll move on to the questions that came in. There were more miscellaneous questions. And so those questions include some from the Mandarin Blueprint community forum, as well as email questions and questions that are a bit more miscellaneous that came through in the course. So the first is TIAN in the Mandarin Blueprint community. TIAN says, is it okay to have a gap between Anki review and the course lessons? For example, I just finished lesson 29 in the foundation course, but I'm only in lesson 19 or 20 in my Anki. The gap is getting wider because creating props and making movies is happening fairly quickly now. I read all the sample sentences, conversations, etc., but I'm still going through the lessons much faster than I can review the flashcards. I don't really want to slow down my momentum, but should I give the lessons a break until I catch up with the flashcards? Thank you for your awesome support as always. Well, so there's already kind of a way of doing this that some people do. I know that Ben Metcalf, who we did a case study, he kind of does it this way, but it's not necessarily the way we've suggested that you do it when it comes to when do you review flashcards versus when you learn. So our philosophy on this is that you should make the flashcards while you're learning. I believe it's one of the in phase 1 for sure there's a video that explains how to use Anki with the lesson platform, but there might be another one again in phase 3. I'll double check. But the point is, what you should be doing is while you're learning, you should have Anki open on the screen to browse to the relevant deck, and then you should have the course platform open on the right side of the screen. So maybe left side of the screen is Anki, right side of the screen is the course platform. And when you go through either a sentence or a prop or make a movie, you unsuspend the card, and if there's anything to put into the card, like for example you're typing in your own prop, you do it right there. And then by doing that, the Anki reviews you get that day will be exactly the reviews that you learned that particular day. So it sounds like what you're doing, TIAN, is just learning without having Anki open and without unsuspending cards and adding in content to Anki while you're learning, but you're just going through Anki later. There's nothing particularly wrong with that in theory, but you've run into the problem with it, which is that you end up going too far ahead in the learning material versus the Anki. And that can become a problem because then you forget what you learned. The idea is that if you do the Anki flashcards for what you learned the same day, you're increasing your likelihood of remembering it forever. So by getting too far ahead with the Anki reviews from the getting too much of a gap between the Anki reviews and the lessons, you're increasing the likelihood that you learn it in the course, but then forget it before you ever see it in Anki, right? But you're not going to forget it if you do it the same day. So you should get the new fact into the Anki cycle as soon as possible after you learn it. So what I would recommend for you specifically, XIAO, is to catch up with your Anki and don't do any learning for now. I mean, you can maybe add like one character a day or something, but make sure your Anki is caught up. And then when you're learning, do it as I suggested. Do it the same way. Next, MAKAI ALLBERT has left a question in the community forum. Just a quick suggestion. I think it would be great and interesting if you guys had an Anki deck or even just a podcast where you teach a few 成语. These are Chinese idioms. They have a lot of cultural and historical significance, and also you can impress your Chinese friends. Just a thought. Well, this is definitely in the pipeline. I personally believe that 成语 are used so seldom in day-to-day life that you should really get a huge number of characters and a huge number of grammatical structures under your belt and very well mastered before you bother with 成语. We do have some in the course because they're particularly common, but we were thinking, at some point we'll have like a fully 成语 based course, and they're usually 4 characters, and they do have historical significance. And yes, many times when you use a 成语as opposed to just a regular vocabulary word, Chinese people will be quite impressed. And so it is definitely in the pipeline, but I also think that in terms of importance, they're not as everyday use as some other things are. So I would recommend that for now, you can look them up on your own if you want, and you can check them out. But I do think at some point we're going to make a fully 成语 based part of the course, but it'll be later. It'll be after the intermediate course for sure. Next, Dan in the community. He says, hi, I saw that you have a standard Pinyin chart. Is there a modified Pinyin chart of how the actors and sets map to standard Pinyin? Yes, so we have, first of all, we have the actors blog post and shared Google document. They exist, and they're pretty much the exact same thing. And so I've linked to that below. And we also have an HMM Pinyin chart. Why is it different? That explains exactly how it's different. So I've linked to both of those two below. If any of you have that same question, check it out in the show notes. Both of those are a part of our series, What is the Hanzi Movie Method? And so you can check that out on our blog as well. And again, linked below. Next, we have an email from Tyson Hoffman, and he, this is actually just the end of another email he sent. He had sent us a few little error corrections in our Anki cards where the audio was a little bit off. And in the end of one of his emails, he said the following. He said, every once in a while, some of my author friends float me text to correct before publication. I have an eye and an ear for what sounds right. What's strange is that I can't stand grammar, and my head gets muddled when Chinese teachers fill up the boards with more and more grammar patterns and rules. I totally ignored English grammar as a student because I was just a rebellious kid who had planned on being a professional skateboarder. Nice. Trying to get to Chinese fluency through relearning English grammar and principles and applying them to ideas like stative verbs, auxiliary verbs, directional compounds, etc. is just too much. This is why I appreciate the idea of comprehensible input and spaced repetition. Only if I hear something repeated enough times in a certain context does it stick, and then I get an unconscious feel for it. If I ever get out to your part of China, I've never been so far to the west, I'll pay y'all a visit. Well, we do live in the greatest city in China, Chengdu, so anybody who wants to come out here, you'll not regret it. These statements about grammar are so on point to how Luke and I have actually had our experience, how we've observed other people in our classes when we were at university, observing their pain, as it were, when they were learning Chinese. And so we've realized that while pointing out grammar patterns, like I did at the beginning of this podcast, is something that can excite the curious part of your brain that wants to know why about things, it can also cause problems because it's, you can think of it like this. It can cause problems because it makes you think too much about how the language is structured as opposed to just being in the language. So it's a categorical difference. So when you're looking at a grammar structure, what it should be is going, oh, that's something I already knew, but just never articulated in this way. And that's fine, that's enjoyable, and that's really not going to hurt your comprehensible input journey. But if you start with a grammar point and then learn sentences with it, the context is all wrong, because that's never how the process goes in real life. You never think, what grammar structure do I want to use before I speak to somebody? You just speak. It just arises naturally in consciousness what is supposed to come next in your speech. And so that truth means that if you're putting grammar first, you're completely misunderstanding what it is that grammar is as an academic discipline. It's an ex post facto analysis of something we can already do. We're already able to use language to speak. And then linguists went, but how are we actually structuring this thing that we can already do? And then they started to create grammar rules. But it's not even calling them grammar rules. They're more like grammar observations. That's what you should think of grammar as. They're observations we made. And we went, look at this. After all these, hundreds of thousands of years of language evolving, we've created these patterns. And isn't that an interesting observation? It's not a rule. It's like a rule implies that you start with the rule and go from there. No, it's an observation. And so that's a really important thing to think about when you're creating your grammar structures and learning about grammar at all. Just see a lot of comprehensible input. Like Tyson said, comprehensible input combined with spaced repetition is a golden combination for language acquisition. Brett Young via email. He says, thank you for your response. After listening to your podcast for the last several months, you have helped me to not be as concerned with reaching a certain HSK level. The HSK being the level test by the Confucius Institute that's the only internationally recognized test for Chinese as a second language. There's a new one coming out called the Oral Chinese Test, which is a spoken test for Chinese. It's also going to be recognized by the Confucius Institute, but we'll talk to you more about that later. There's actually there's some of you who we might want to try that test on, but we'll get to that in the future, maybe next week. So going back, I think for most of us, the HSK is just a way to check our progress. But with Mandarin Blueprint, progress is easy to discern without any type of test or certificate. That's right. I mean, I think when you get to the high levels of the HSK, a reason to take the HSK could be you want it on your resume. But other than that, though, it's really just a barometer, and Mandarin Blueprint provides you with plenty of barometers, so I totally agree. I also sent over some questions about remembering words that you did address in the podcast. Since then, I have noticed others have had similar questions. I think the thing that helped me was to finally get some perspective. In the early stages of the course, we are just being introduced to the words, and we won't really, quote unquote, learn them until we are seeing them in context later. Along those lines, I did have one suggestion for the course, especially in the early stages of the course. On the level reviews, instead of showing all the words that we quote-unquote know, maybe you could say that there are words that have been introduced to or are now familiar with. I know you are excited to show how much progress we have made, but when I hear someone say that I should know a word, if I really don't know it fully and how it's used in context, then I think I've missed something and need to go back again and try to relearn. Yeah, I understand. This can make me feel very frustrated and lost when that happens for a lot of words. I have fallen off the wagon, or is it on the wagon, Seinfeld reference, with regards to Chinese for the last 2 months and have not really studied at all. I do still listen to the podcast, and the last few podcasts have inspired me to take the pressure off trying to learn at a certain rate and just find the joy of learning Chinese again with your course. I can't remember who said it, but the comment was that you can learn anything if you get rid of the time goals and just try to enjoy what you're doing. Right, so there's plenty of things to point out here. So certainly the point about perspective is really important. So it's easy to look at a sentence and go, why is the word functioning like that? And we'll answer anytime you guys want to ask those types of questions. But the truth is that if you continue to get more input and you continue to grow your character count, which means you can grow the type of input you can do. First, you can only do simple sentences, then you can do more complicated sentences, into dialogues, into short paragraphs, into longer paragraphs, into stories, and so forth. The more exposure you're going to get to that word. It's going to come up again and again. And certainly all the words that are in the foundation course are going to come up a lot in your natural sort of study environment or just any content that you happen to read because they're at high frequency. And so that will allow you to recognize that most of the acquisition of how a word works comes unconsciously just by seeing it in context, like probably 10 to 20 times. And then you'll just sort of go, oh, I got it. I sort of get how this works now. And so a lot of times when you're asking that question in the early stages, the best thing to do is to just keep reading and just don't worry about it too much. If you really, really don't understand, well, that's why we have an English translation. So like to some degree in the early stages, the reason there's an English translation is just to be like, well, even if you really don't understand, this is the English translation. So you should be able to at least understand that. So, and then eventually if you see that same word in context, you'll click. And so it's actually, in reality, a bit of a waste of time to stop and go, but why though? Because you could be continuing to read, you could be continuing to move on and getting more and more reps in, because there's a lot of what, learning Chinese and learning any language is reps and exposure and mass exposure, right? So I like that Brett's making that point. He's absolutely correct there. And as for that point, the semantic point about whether we're saying we know the words or maybe say introduced to or familiar with, I think that's fair. I think that when you get to later parts of the course, you know the word faster. So in the early parts of the course, for example, phase 1 and 2, we don't even have sentences yet. But we do say throughout the course frequently that you don't really know a word until you see it in context. So it's just a bit of a semantic issue, but I take your point. It's fair to say that in the first 2 phases of the course, you're introduced to the word, you're familiar with the word, but you're not necessarily acquired. It's not necessarily acquired yet. And then as for the last point that Brett made here about kind of falling off the wagon, and then also recognizing that it shouldn't be about time, it should be about enjoying what you're doing. Time goals can be useful, but you have to recognize the limitation in it, because the farther out you get from a goal, the harder it is to predict what the process is going to be like. So, this comes up a lot for us with Mandarin Blueprint in thinking about the future of the company and what's going to happen and what are we going to try to do next. And while we have, goals that we might set, we try to make them more goals that are based on the achievement of a thing. And then you could say, well, the achievement of a thing by a certain time. Well, yeah, that can sometimes help you, but depending on how large the project is. For example, we're going to make another expansion from 1,530 characters to 3,000 characters. And I don't know how long that's going to take, because we have to do it right. I could make a prediction about it. I could say probably takes 6 to 8 months, but I'm not really sure. I know that the current expansion that we did from 592 characters to 1,530 characters, a lot of times it was like, oops, we realized that we needed to spend a lot of time doing something that we didn't anticipate. And so now it's taking longer. And should we feel bad about ourselves that we didn't reach a time goal? Well, no, because we're trying to do it right. We're trying to make it an actually effective, helpful course. So if we were to get all down on ourselves because we didn't do it by some arbitrarily created time goal, then we're not going to enjoy the process. But if we just go, hey, we're going to try to keep making this course more and more fulfilling for people, get them more content that will help them stay in one simple platform and still be able to acquire Chinese, and everything that we do is in the realm of that overarching goal, then the time goals tend to not matter as much. So that's a good point there. And yeah, just be in the moment while you're studying. It's like you can't ever learn Chinese in a day. It's not possible. It is only incremental improvement. There's nothing that you can do that isn't based on incremental improvement. So you have to just be in those increments. Be in them while they're happening. And then, you look back in a year and you reflect and you go, wow, I've built, half a castle or something, and it's something that you can't possibly conceptualize on the daily level. So you just have to be in the moment, live in the sentence you're looking at, live in the character you're learning right at this moment, and not be distracted too much by thoughts of like, when will I be fluent? It's like, well, the less time you spend worrying about when you'll be fluent, the faster you'll become fluent, because you'll be in the language itself. Next, another email from Tyson. This is regarding traditional characters and simplified characters. He was talking about his friend who is trying to learn new characters in his school. He says his conflict is that he's in a class introducing new characters each week, and he wants to benefit from your method, but he's still got to keep up with his coursework. He wanted to find a complete prop list to see you recommend for each prop so that he could start applying them in his class studies. The idea of sitting through a video for each lesson just to run through them so that he can see your props and then start applying them on his own is a bit discouraging. He didn't realize that you take the training wheels off at one point and that there are less videos as you progress. Yeah, so that's the thing that happens a lot with our course, is that people kind of assume it's going to be one way the entire time, but our course progresses and changes and evolves as you move through it, as it should. I mean, if it was the exact same thing the whole way through, it would be eventually too tedious, so we have to change it up. And so I'm glad to see that your friends figured that out. I too found this very slow in the beginning because I already know hundreds of traditional characters, but I've decided to pause my regular classes and focus on laying the Mandarin Blueprint method foundation and seeing where it leads me. Yeah, so that makes perfect sense. I've come to see that the guys who simplified the characters sometimes switched out a more complicated sound component for an easier to write sound component, and so the props don't have the same consistency as you give us in the Mandarin Blueprint method. That's true. Although it does mean that if you learn the simplified characters, many traditional characters are a simple change towards getting it down. So it's just like, oh, this particular component always translates to this other slightly more complicated component in traditional characters. But it's like a rule, you know. That being said, it's not something that is always true. Sometimes it's like not a very clear rule why one character became another character. Though I prefer the traditional characters, knowing the simplified will probably be more useful for me in the long run, and so now I'm just making notes of the differences and not worrying too much about memorizing the traditional ones. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, there are a lot more people in the world who use the simplified characters. The traditional characters are useful when you're outside of mainland China, so they're both worth learning. I've been living in mainland China for so long now that I just haven't had the incentive to learn the traditional characters properly, although I've picked up on a lot of them. You know where you see a lot of traditional characters is in the KTVs. Whenever you go to karaoke with your friends, that for some reason most of the Chinese songs that come up are in traditional when they're going across the screen. I've picked up a lot of the corresponding relationships because they're singing in Mandarin, but I can see the traditional characters, so I can understand what they're saying, going, oh, okay, so that's how they changed this character that used to be, in my mind, is this way, but it's this way in traditional. Cool. Next, we have an email from Kent. Kent says, greetings, Phil and Luke. First, my apologies, as I did not remember getting the first email asking for an interview that was regarding a case study. I will definitely do a podcast with you guys. I just want to get a little further to be able to say more about how great your course is. Trust me, you have no bigger fan. Nice. And I just want to point out to anybody who's interested in doing a case study with us, we don't mind what part of the course you're in because we like to kind of check in with you. So we like to say, okay, you've done the first case study when you were maybe at level 12, and we'll do another one with you when you're at level 25 or when you're at level 45. So it doesn't matter to us if you're not too far in the course. I understand the thinking. It's like, I'd like to be further along, so I have more to say. And it's fair enough. You know, obviously, anybody who wants to do a case study, you should do it on your own terms and at your own convenience. But just bear that in mind, that we don't mind that because it gives us a chance to see you progress. So here you are at level 12 when you just knew some characters and words, and now here you are later, 2 months later, where you know all these sentences and whatever. So that's always no problem for us. Continuing with Kent's email. He says, just as a background, I work for a Chinese company in Hong Kong. I came here in December of 2016. I was only going to stay for 2 years, so I didn't really worry about learning Chinese. Just thought I'd pick up what I could. I didn't worry about Cantonese and still don't, as you don't need it in Hong Kong. After 2 years, my boss asked me to stay. I asked him for Chinese classes and they were absolutely horrible, unsurprising. He paid for 2 semesters and I hated them and was so happy when I would have a work trip so I could miss class. I truly got nothing out of it. In fact, it made me want to learn less than wanting to learn more. When I stumbled on your method and you guys talked about how you also had been through classes and how much they were a quote-unquote false friend, I decided to give you a try. Hopefully in a few months I will be able to say, and the rest is history, except they'll say it in Mandarin. Send me another reminder in a month and I'll come on to do the podcast. Best regards, Kent. So yeah, this is a great email, and those classes are soul destroying. It's really important to recognize that you're risking something when you take traditional classes, which is that you risk starting to hate the language. And that is, that's a problem. Like, you can't, it's possible that the classes make you not want to learn anymore at all. And that's like, it's so disappointing that that's the case with traditional Chinese learning at this point. But, we're moving forward into the future. We have online courses now, so we can get over these types of hurdles much more easily than was possible in the past. That's what Mandarin Blueprint's here for. It's the exact reason that we started to create the course in the first place. We were like, these traditional methods are awful. So totally sympathize with you there, Kent, and hopefully we'll hear you on a case study in the future coming up. Next, we have an email from Kika. Hi, guys. Although I have been learning Chinese on my own for the last 5 years or more, I decided to start from scratch with you because I still have trouble remembering either characters or meanings or pronunciation or tones, which is very annoying, especially when I try to do some reading. So, I had been searching for a method to help me better retain all the information about each character. I tried a whole bunch of repetition apps, but then I realized endless repetitions without context is really of no use. So I can truly say that I'm having lots of fun going through the motions of your technique. I'm so invested creating my crazy scenes/stories with the actors, the sets, props, etc., that the characters' words get virtually engraved in my mind. I hope to continue until I learn to speak as nicely as Luke and Phil. Well, that's great to hear, Kika, because, I've been studying Chinese for, I guess, about 5 years. I guess it's been over 6 now. But just knowing that is helping with, that's exactly what the Hanzi movie method does so well. It says, okay, don't have any more confusion about exactly what tone this is or what the components are or what the pronunciation is. Stop being 90% sure, because that's what it feels like when you're not sure. When you see a character you don't know, a lot of times there's a clue in it or whatever, but you're not 100% sure that it's that, because sometimes when you see the phonetic clue, it's the exact same as the original character. For example, there's the character hui, which means will or a meeting or able to. And then there's another character that's related to painting, which has the silk component next to it, and the right side component is hui. And it's also pronounced hui. So that's an example where the right side phonetic clue is exactly the same. But then other examples of the right side component, it's like, oh, maybe it's gui in this case, or it's something that's similar, but it's not exactly the same. So then you can't really know for sure. And that's what the Hanzi movie method does so well, is that when you're imagining yourself in a room, in a set of your choice, there's no doubt about what the pronunciation is with a person. It's like a person in a room of a set. That's your pronunciation, done and dusted. It's so easy to remember compared to just trying to, I guess, remember the letters of a character, the Pinyin letters. Like, how are you going to remember that without some kind of mnemonic device? So that's great to hear. I'm so glad that you're solidifying your past knowledge, Kika. Paul Tomasovic on Make a Movie for Sure. He says, I've noticed during finishing the levels till this point and in my Pleco app that sure uses a noun, both in the second tone, means something different. Knowledge and time. I understand that words in the same tone and spelling will take on different meaning if used as a noun, verb, etc. But is it common to see a word with the same spelling, tone, and usage have a different meaning? So this is a good question. Well, first of all, this alternative version of shi, meaning knowledge, is incredibly rare. And that's something that Pleco won't tell you. Like when you're looking at Pleco, it's just a list of the definitions of the word. It's possible to have these, different definitions. But so many of them you do not need to worry about at all in your early stages. Like I have so rarely seen shi used in that way that I had to remind myself that was the case. And I read Chinese all the time every day. So it's like there would have been plenty of opportunity for me to notice it, meaning knowledge as opposed to time. And so that's something that I would just be wary of when you're looking at Pleco, is it doesn't give you any sense of frequency. It's just a pure list of possible definitions. And then the second thing is, does this happen very often where it's the same spelling, tone, and usage? It's usually an exception. And again, we're talking about frequency here. So if you want to look at archaic forms of characters. So for example, in ancient Chinese, I took a couple of ancient Chinese classes when I was at Sichuan University, and I actually really liked it because in ancient Chinese, a character, a word was always one character, or at least for a lot of the history of it. As the language got more complex, then they're introduced two-character words. But for a lot of the history of ancient Chinese, one character was one word always, and they often had different meanings. So, like, for example, shi existed as a character, but it meant here, which is now 这里 or 这儿, right? And so that's an example of a character's archaic meaning not being the same as the modern meaning. And the archaic meaning might show up in your dictionary, right? But when you're talking about archaic meanings, you don't need to know them. They're not necessary to acquire. So I would say that if you're going to say technically, then this happens a lot. If you're going to say practically, it is pretty rare. I can think of one example is the character hua, which means flower, but it also means to spend time or money. And it's the exact same character, the exact same pronunciation, the exact same tone. But that doesn't happen very often. Usually it's like if there's a secondary meaning that's very different from the first meaning, it's a different pronunciation. Like, for example, chang means long and zhang means to grow, and it's the same character, but they have different pronunciations. So it's like, at least there's that distinction there to get you to recognize, okay, the zhang, meaning to grow, is a totally different idea than chang, an adjective meaning long. So that being the case, the situation of the same pronunciation, the same character, but different meanings, it doesn't happen very much. In practical terms, again, in practical terms, you could probably find an archaic meaning that's the same, that's different than the modern meaning, or some very, very rarely used secondary or tertiary meaning, but in practical sense, it doesn't happen that much. Okay. Next, we have James on the pronunciation mastery lesson, which is Annie's review for the nasal final yung. What I have found is that dependent on the region the speaker is coming from, the pronunciation of yung can differ. My wife is from southeast of China, and she very rarely pronounces the yung sound in full. I had to get used to it. It's a bit confusing at times, though. I feel you. At Luke and Phil, are my observations correct? Is it a dialect mannerism thing? Sure, yeah. Southeast of China is where you have some dialects that are so different from Mandarin that they're not recognizable to other people, other parts of China. Like, so where I live in Sichuan, Sichuanhua is different from Mandarin for sure, but it's the kind of thing that a Mandarin speaker can, maybe on the first day they're in Sichuan, they're a little bit confused, but they'll quickly figure it out. They'll quickly kind of get the hang of it and understand how to use and how to hear Sichuanhua. But many of the southeastern dialects, like around Fujian, are, it doesn't matter if you know Mandarin, they're completely different and it's hard to understand. So that means that those people, when they learn Mandarin, they're almost definitely going to have some weird accents or dialects related to it. But again, this is what we always come back to. Learn Mandarin because it has the most possible connections to the other dialects. Learning any individual dialect is going to leave you kind of pigeonholed in that region of the country. And so Mandarin is something that even in the places where the dialect is totally different, they usually at least understand it. So that would be my recommendation for thinking about that. Kathleen Gans on Make a Movie for Bu. She said, sometimes bu is pronounced with a second tone. Are there rules on when it is second and when it is fourth? She gives some examples here, but the answer is yes. And so I've linked below to the tone change rules blog post we made. And there's also a tone change rules lesson in the pronunciation mastery specifically about bu. And it's actually a really simple rule. Bu is naturally fourth tone unless it comes before another fourth tone. So she actually gave some examples of 不用,不要,不是. Well, 用,要,是, they're all fourth tone. So to make it flow a little bit more easily, you say 不用,不是,不要, right? And that by doing it that way, you make the flow of the sentence simpler, because 不 is such a common character that is negating any verb, that it's easier if you can do that up, down, as opposed to 不用. It's a little bit harder to say. So 不用, 不要不是 flows a little bit better. Next, Paul on Anki Decks Inside, level 9 completes is the review lesson for level 9 in the Mandarin Blueprint method. Paul says, I also agree with all the below comments and want to say how much I appreciate the resources y'all have created to help make it easier to focus on learning Chinese and not have to worry about becoming an Anki master in order to make it to the next level. After downloading Anki Deck 10 through 12, I noticed that the deck was suspended. This is the first time this happened to me, but within minutes, I used the link to the Anki tutorial that y'all provided, and the deck unsuspended within minutes, and was back into business of cruising along with my studies. Thanks for taking care of the enormous amount of details that makes this course enjoyable. It's these details that helps keep me going. Well, glad to hear that, Paul. Anki is a finicky app, so we need to make sure that our Anki tutorials link is as comprehensive as we can make it, because it's not an app that is necessarily all that user-friendly, so we want to make sure that even for the people who aren't particularly savvy with software applications, they could still get by just by following our tutorials. So as a reminder to anybody who's forgotten, there is the Anki tutorials button in the sidebar of the course that you can get to anytime from the Mandarin Blueprint method. Jeffrey Herzog on Make a Movie for Buy, which means 100. He says, I can imagine how this keyword connection might be difficult to remember. Instead of the dove turning into 100 doves at the end of my scene, should I have it turn into something else that represents 100, like Ben Franklin? I can imagine I might forget just how many doves it turns into. So I believe that this was a lesson where we had one of our former students in the video with us, and so they might have gone with something like have 100 doves come out of as the result of the scene. But interestingly enough, Jeffrey, as you've probably already noticed by the time you'll see this podcast, we recommend Benjamin Franklin as the prop for this character. So certainly having Benjamin Franklin as the result of the scene, that's a fine enough keyword connection, because of course Benjamin Franklin's on the $100 bill in the US. So, and got that all about the Benjamins by, at the time, Puff Daddy. That's perfectly fine. You can totally use Ben Franklin, and I agree, having 100 doves isn't necessarily all that clear. Michael Rochford on Make a Movie for Bay, which means shell. I just can't transform my prop as suggested. So what we suggested is taking the character Mu, which is basically a rectangle with two lines in the middle, and taking the two lines in the middle and turning them into the way this character looks. So taking those two lines and turning it that way. But Michael said I had trouble doing it that way. So what I did, so he says, instead I have Clifford the Big Red Dog being eaten by a dog eating clam. So Clifford the Big Red Dog being eaten by a dog eating clam, with only his hind legs showing, and it works for me. Question is, will it hurt me later on? I don't see why, because that's distinctive enough from Clifford the Big Red Dog as he is. It's, distinctive enough from a clam. You can imagine some level of, how graphic you want to make that the appearance of this prop is up to you. And so by making it a bit more graphic or a bit more harrowing that Clifford's getting eaten by a clam, that can make it more memorable. So I don't think that'll be an issue. I think it'll be fine. James on Annie Lao Shi review for Compound Final Yo. He says, I love how Annie started adding some attitude to these revisions after a couple of modules. Makes it so much more enjoyable. I agree. Annie is a former Sichuan University professor, so she tends to be more academic in her sort of instincts about things, but she has a silly and fun side, so it was great to see her show that a little bit in those review lessons. Lucas Osani on bonus Don't Make These Mistakes Learning Chinese is one of our bonus videos, and he says, how beautiful is this? Do not embrace the path, embrace the walking. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, there's a Buddhist concept that's the idea is that you can only walk the path when you realize you are the path. There's a lot of a sense in the West that your path is something that is separate from you, but everything about you experiencing life and going through day-to-day decisions and processes are all influenced by all the things that are happening in your body and around you. And so you've got all these internal metabolic processes and neurological processes and hunger, thirst, and needs to go to the bathroom, and all these things that are happening constantly and flowing, as the Taoists would say. And because they all influence what you become and how you behave and what next step is happening, then how is that any different from anything else that would influence your path? You know, there's a path drawn out for you in front of you. Okay, that influences your path, but what else influences your path? All the things that are happening within your own body and within your own consciousness. So you are the path. And so by being inside that recognition and just going, okay, well, today and how I spend my time with Chinese is just about being in the path, being a part of it, being the path itself, is quite relaxing in a way. So, glad to hear that you found that useful, Lucas. Sarah Barden on Simple Final A quiz. I am really finding the explanations extremely helpful, and I'm feeling excited about this course after struggling trying to learn phrases by repetition off badly designed apps. My motivation is pretty high as I'm marrying into a Shanghainese family. Thanks, guys. Well, great, Sarah. I'm so glad to hear about that. And this course is really a game changer. It's the type of thing that can get people excited when they, weren't too motivated previously. So thrilled to hear that that's how you feel about it, and keep it up. You're on your way. You're well on your way. Your Shanghainese family will love you more and more the further you get into Mandarin Blueprint. James on the lesson You Did It, which is the final lesson in the pronunciation mastery. James says, 10 days in, and I've never felt so confident about my journey to fluency in Chinese! 3 exclamation points. You're both bloody legends, and I'd love to thank you for putting this whole thing together for us commoners with none or close to no knowledge on the multiple facets and aspects of this amazing language. Kudos to you, and kudos to me. Double win. Now on to character learning. I love it. Great attitude, James, and building Mandarin Blueprint is similar to the process that you guys are doing learning Mandarin. So it's a daily process that we try to live in the process. We try to be like, okay, well, today there's energy that is running through our bodies today, and what can we do to apply that energy towards making things a little bit better? And we've just been doing that now for over 4 years, and so the results are what they are. But it's just that daily, I don't want to say grind. It's like a daily it's a daily focusing of energy on a specific goal. And so similarly to how you're learning Mandarin now, we're doing the same thing with Mandarin Blueprint, and we're going to keep doing it. So thank you for your encouragement. And you're right, it is something that you deserve kudos for getting through the pronunciation mastery. It doesn't learn itself. So well done, James. And that's excellent. So that is it for our miscellaneous questions. Let's move on to some course updates. The first update is that the final 10 levels of our current expansion are going to be coming out very soon. The first five of the remaining 10 should be out already by the time this podcast releases. And then the final 5 levels will be not too long after that. We just have to go through and check everything and, all of that. So, very close to being done there. Another important update. So, the 5 grammar building Anki decks from the foundation course. So that's levels 13 through 36. We decided to make a change to them, and so we've re-uploaded them to each of the lessons, and they're linked down below. But what do we do? Well, previously we put in multiple closed deletes into a sentence, and we did this based on the full word that you learned. So, for example, in level 14, you learn the character qi, and that unlocks a word, qilai. Now, lai, that character you learned in level 13, but now that you know qi, you now unlock this word, qilai. And the way we did it before was we would say, you learned the new word, qilai, so let's close out both qi and lai in the sentence. And you can see this example in the show notes. But we decided that that's not actually how we want to do it. We just want to close out the character that you learned. So in this case, the character you learned in level 14 that unlocks the sentence 儿子你起来吃饭吧. That sentence is, we're just going to close out 起, not 起来, not both of them, because that's just a waste of your time, really. Like, you're going to see lie plenty of times. You've already had sentences that were specifically from that in level 13 that had lie closed out. So we realized we were giving you extra cards that you don't need. And so what we did is, through levels 13 through 36, we made it so that the only closed out character in the sentence is the most recently learned character, which is actually going to save you thousands of cards worth of time. It's one of those things that when we realized it, we were like, why didn't we do this at the beginning? But, you know, we just were thinking before, we're like, oh, close out both of them because it's a 2-character word, close out both characters. But really the only one you need to have closed out is the most recently learned character, and that helps it remain a character-focused course, a character-centric course. So there are now thousands fewer cards while getting across the same fundamental content that we'll still be going through in the spaced repetition way. So this is great for you guys. It's going to save you some time, and it makes the course a lot better. The links to the lessons where you can download those Anki decks are all in the show notes below. We'll also send out an announcement about it when this happens. But there's one thing that you want to do, though, you want to make sure you do, which is that in Anki, after you add these, and add all 5, after you've added all 5 of them, and again, this is only for people who are in Phase 3 of the course already. If you're not to Phase 3, you don't need to worry about it. You'll just get this when you arrive there. But when you go to Anki, after you've added all the decks, you go to Anki, main page, you select Tools in the top toolbar, then you hit Empty Cards. And after you hit Empty Cards, a dialog box will come up that says, here are these empty cards, and you'll have the option to delete the cards. Go ahead and delete them. You're not deleting notes. A note is like the sentence existing at all. You're just deleting the empty cards that got deleted when we went through this process of getting rid of the extra closed deletes. It may not be necessary because I did it on my end, but since I'm not totally sure how that's going to work from Anki's end, you may need to do that. So when it comes to empty cards, it's just Anki main page, tools, empty cards, delete cards. Just a little quick step there to make sure you're on point. All right. So moving on to movie scene shares. We got a bunch this week, and I'm excited about them. First, on Make a Movie for Zao, early. Kika says, Zidane came into my grandpa's house showing off his legendary dribbling skills with a football so bright it looked like the sun. The ball was so shiny, the glare blinded him, and he crashed against the bedroom door, making so much noise he woke everyone up. My grandpa was very annoyed. It's too early to be playing football, he said, taking a cross knife and stabbing the ball, which exploded, creating a fusion reaction. Nice. So we've got the 2 props clearly. We got the cross knife. That's fine. We have the soccer ball that's like a sun. We have the concept of too early, which is represented by everybody just waking up. Everybody can make the connection between waking up and a groggy feeling you have in the morning with early. So that's perfectly fine. I love it. Another one from Kika on Make a Movie for Chang, which means to sing. My estranged husband invited his best friend forever, Charlie Chaplin, to his home to celebrate our soon-to-be divorce. Oh, jeez. And so we have ANG represents the estranged husband's place, and Charlie Chaplin represents the CH. So we have Chang, and of course we're going to get into the bathroom at some point here. They were drinking Always Sunny cocktails all day. I think that's a reference to Always Sunny in Philadelphia. They got so drunk, they started to sweat. Both headed to the bathroom. Charlie opened his big mouth, and my ex, thinking he was about to vomit, opened 2 windows to get some air in. But instead of throwing up, Charlie began to sing. The sun will come out tomorrow. Bet your bottom dollar that tomorrow there'll be sun. Nice. Got singing there. We've got the 2 windows representing the right side components. We have the big mouth. You might want to do something to the mouth to make it a little bit more clear, because everybody already has a mouth, so you have to like super exaggerate how big it is so you know that it's a prop in the scene. But I'm sure that that'll be memorable. I like it. Another one from Kika on TIAN. which is the character for electricity. She says, my grandma was in the backyard trying to sunbathe, but it was too cloudy. Don't worry, I'll make you a tanning bed, said Diana Ross, the actor in the scene. And the backyard of the grandma's house, so that's good. Diana Ross came out through the window carrying a super long extension cord. She hooked on the end to grandma's lounge chair and held the other end on her hand. Didn't I tell you I can create electricity with my voice? She began singing, Blame It on the Sun, and the lounge chair began to glow with amazing purple UVA rays. It's excellent. So we have everything clear. The pronunciation is done and dusted in the first sentence there. And then we have the hooked extension cord and the sun. So excellent. Very good. Ija on Make a Movie for Chue. The keyword for Chue is despite or nevertheless. Her actor is the queen, a world leader. So that's the representation of Chue. The set is her clinical school, which is her education. So that's the representation of or E. And the props are Snorlax and a wax seal. The queen just downloaded Pokemon Go on her smartphone and went around playing it in the backyard of my clinical school. A wild Snorlax appeared. The queen used her soft voice to ask the Snorlax to move. Despite it coming from the queen, it's not very effective. Nevertheless, the queen then used the wax seal to stamp a letter of request for the Snorlax to be deported. Snorlax then quickly apologized and made way for the queen. It's super effective. I like it. Yep, that's perfectly fine, and that gets the idea of despite going pretty well there because, the queen, it's like what more sort of authority could you theoretically have, but it's still not effective. Despite her being the queen, it's still not effective. So well done. Tom on Make a Movie for Ma, which means to scold. I went back and slightly altered my scene for Ma, which is the right side or the bottom component here and means horse, after watching this video. For Ma, I had Marilyn Manson sitting in a wheelchair with a broken leg by the window of my old apartment, smoking a cigarette and playing with the knight chess piece in his hand. Depressed because he got injured and has to stay in the house playing chess by himself. And the knight chess piece makes him daydream about getting back outside and riding a horse. But since I had Marilyn Manson proposing to Shadowfax, a horse from Lord of the Rings, on the roof for Ma, which is the question character, I decided it would make more sense if he fell off the roof and broke his leg, and that he was staring at the chess piece because it reminded him of Shadowfax, who had said no to his proposal. Then in this scene, they're in the backyard and he's scolding Shadowfax. So yeah, he's basically combining the scenes for Ma, and Ma, so that there's some continuity between them, which, because they all happen to have the same actor and the same set, though different rooms, they can all sort of tie in together. So that's perfectly fine to do. It doesn't happen very much in the course where you can make those types of connections, but it does happen sometimes, and it's very useful to do so. Kika on Make a Movie for Hua, which means to change. Humpty Dumpty is in Australia visiting my sister, but the weather is so hot he is afraid that he will be transformed, which is the key word, into a boiled egg. He decides to take a cold shower, but he steps on the soap and has a great fall. Lucky for him, he only cracks a bit, but now he needs a crutch to walk. Hearing the commotion in the bathroom and thinking there's a burglary in process, my sister storms in, striking Humpty Dumpty with her samurai sword. Poor friend, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Right, so she must have used crutch to mean the right side component, and then samurai sword for the left side component, which is fine. And so, yeah, great, excellent scene. Kika, you got it down. You understand the scene very well. I'm going to move on a little bit to a scene from Abigail, which is for Yuan, which means distant or far. She says her AN set is the lecture hall of a school I went to in Australia. One of my friends there was called Anna, so that's her connection to the school in Australia being with AN. And then her actor is, for U, is Queen Elizabeth II, So that's her actor for that. And then, of course, we'll make sure we're in the some third room to make it third tone. Her prompts, the top prop, Yuan, is Zibzek, one of my English students who struggles with in at the beginning. In/at the beginning, right. That makes sense. That's a really personal connection. And then the bottom component is the red carpet, the movement component. Zibzek patiently waits his turn to walk up the red carpet to ask the queen a question. He asks why she is so far away from England. I guess that makes sense, right? So you're going to have the that question of being like, well, we're in China here, and you're so far away from England. What's going on? Or actually, in this case, Australia. Yeah, right, because the lecture hall is in Australia. So that makes sense. You could maybe add some visualization of like suddenly zooming out from the school and like zooming to the earth and seeing how far away England is and then zooming back in just so you can get that visualization of far away. But I think it's clear enough as it is. And so excellent scene. Nice. Kent on Make a Movie for Bay. My uncle Burf, the representation of B, is out front of Keith's house. So that's the EI, and it's out front. So we have Bay right there. He's talking with Sully, James P. Sullivan, or the Moo component, and Megan Trainor, the Boo component. So he's talking with Sully, and Megan Trainor comes in, twirling around, singing, and accidentally hits them both in the nuts. We should have worn cups, yells my uncle over her obnoxious singing. And so even though this is a separate meaning of the word cup, it's an English homonym, it's still like that's a strong enough association. You have somebody getting hit in the balls, and then they have the cup there, which is usually used to prevent that, and the idea of regret that you didn't wear a cup at that moment is perfectly clear. And so even though this means literally like a cup to drink from, it's fine. Your brain is still able to make those types of connections. So that's excellent. Nice one there, Kent. Tyson on Make a Movie for One. So this is like to smell. Wolverine, WU, has agreed to enter some mysterious Moriadors, men, which is the outside component, behind the stove in the kitchen of my EN set, because this will give him a heightened smell. He enters, but when he comes out, he realizes that he has turned into Dumbo, which is the ear component. What a surprise! But with this big nose, he can smell everything now. All right, great. So, excellent. That's awesome. Very good scene, and I think that, the idea that he comes out with a heightened smell is sort of arbitrarily chosen, but that's fine, because that essentially the keyword connection, as far as you're concerned, before you see the character, is an arbitrary thing, right? So having the idea that going into these Moriadors will give him a heightened sense of smell is actually perfectly okay. Just have some moments in the scene where he's going, and he can, actually, I guess it's not visualize, whatever the word would be to imagine the smell. Olfactory types of mnemonics are definitely possible. And I love that scene. That's great. Kent on Make a Movie for Dung, which means to wait. I take Dave into the conference room, third tone, at work where I am engaged learning Chinese. So that's the ENG set. That's why his work is ENG. So we have Dung there. I want to show off our giant Buddha statue, which is the representation of the temple at the bottom component. When we walk in, we see that it is covered in bamboo scaffolding. So we will have to wait to see it another time. I like that because, scaffolding on a building definitely gives you the impression that you're going to have to wait to see it in its finality, and having bamboo scaffolding around the Buddha statue covers your props, and it also has that sense of, we'll have to wait. And I like that. It's very clear. Excellent. Michael Rochford on Make a Movie for T, Wen T to T, so topic. On a big computer screen in my kitchen, the word topic is flashing in bright, bold letters. Okay. Tammy, TI, is trying to decide what she is going to write about. On the left side of the keyboard is a large volume of Shakespeare. On the right is a copy of the Constitution. Nice. So that's the two props. The minutes tick by as topic keeps flashing, and she starts pulling at her hair desperately. As she keeps procrastinating, the flashing word turns red and an alarm sounds at each flash because she's running out of time. So this scene is, I like it, but there really should be a better way to visualize topic here, because just having the idea of topic flashing on the screen is, I mean, it's kind of missing the point of the mnemonics, because the whole point is that we can't really remember letters that well. You can remember it today. You can remember it probably tomorrow. You can remember it even maybe a week from now. But will you remember it 6 months from now what was flashing on the screen? Evolution would say that it's not so easy to remember that, because letters on a page are brand new in evolutionary terms. But faces and places and emotions, they go much deeper. So the thing is, though, I like the idea of the Shakespeare and the Constitution being like two separate topics, you know, that you could potentially write about. That's pretty close. So I would say that having some kind of extra indication that there must be a choice, maybe perhaps having a coin flip being a part of it so that she has to choose a topic, maybe having several different theses next to the Shakespeare and several theses next to the Constitution that are different topics. It's like sort of the topic of my thesis, all right? Or it could be maybe the different types of magazines or different topics of debate, perhaps. Then you'll have two people on the side on a debate team showing up in the scene. All that being said, I'm pretty sure, Michael, that this will be memorable for you, but it's just a point to recognize that the idea of saying that the way you represent the keywords by showing the English word generally isn't following the rules of the method, because it's the whole point is to try to make it all image based so that it's easier to remember. Finally, we're going to rattle off some prop suggestions that came in this week. We have Matu's on Pick a Prop for Tsi. I went with the bearded lady, Kiala Settle, singing This Is Me from the Greatest Showman movie, right? So Tsi is the more formal way to say this. So because he connects the bearded lady with singing that particular song, that is perfectly fine from the Greatest Showman movie. I like it. Tyson on Pick a Prop for In. James Dean, A Rebel Without a Cause, or The Big Bang, right? So because in is meaning cause, and of course he has that connection with James Dean, Rebel Without a Cause, perfectly fine. And The Big Bang, the cause of everything. So I like that. Excellent. Pick a prop for Kai. Tyson says, I could imagine this character looking like the hats sold at Disneyland/Disney World. The long-billed ones with the faces of Goofy or Donald Duck. An actor can wear it in the scene. I could also imagine a geyser, or, kind of related, a sinkhole. Both of these are related also to the idea of open. Nice. Yeah, perfectly fine. That one with the long-billed hats is definitely a personal connection. I can't really think of those hats, but it just goes to show that you can always find something that fits for you. Kent on Pick a Prop for Boo. I finally decided on Meghan Trainor and picture her twirling around with her hair flying out to the sides and her arms out. Mainly because of her song, No. So we have another one where it's like song-based props. I love it. I'm a big fan of using music to remember this stuff. Kent on Pick a Prop for Zo. The Holy Rocket Launcher a la the Holy Hand Grenade from Monty Python, which went well with Abigail's suggestion of John Cleese below. So, right, nice, I like it. The Holy Rocket Launcher. That was such a great scene in that movie. If you can ever find like a scene that's super memorable from a movie, at some point it should find its way into the Hen's Movie Method. MAKAI on Pick a Prop for Shao. I thought of A Few Moments Later, SpongeBob transitional scene, which led me to choose Patrick. So I've seen bits of SpongeBob because it's permeated the culture to a large degree. It's a cultural trope, but I haven't seen this A Few Moments Later transitional scene. So that's personal to MAKAI, but perfectly fine. And then of course he made it more concrete by making it Patrick specifically. William Admides on Pick a Prop for a giant metal detector. Or map/atlas could be good options as well, right? So that's excellent. So the giant metal detector is just how it looks, right? It's very clear. Jack on pick a prop for zi. An abacus, perfectly fine because zi means how many, so an abacus helps you figure out how many. I like that. Tyson on pick a prop for nu. Aretha Franklin, you make me feel like a natural woman. Shania Twain, feel like a woman. The Venus de Milo statue and Eve, all great options for nu, because nu, of course, means female or woman. Next, Tyson on pick a prop for this particular prop. You'll have to see it on the screen or in the show notes because it doesn't have a pronunciation. But it does have a bopomofo pronunciation for owl. So that what he says here is this character is also the Juyin or bopomofo phonetic sound owl. Because it resembles knees, kind of looks like somebody on their knees, I've always imagined this as a skateboarder falling on his knees and saying, ow. Maybe knee pads would be a good prop. Excellent. I like it. That's perfectly fine. William on pick a prop for this prop doesn't have a pronunciation, but it's the right side of both he to drink and ke, thirsty. It's also the left side of xie to rest. Going with an espresso machine because he means to drink, and also the component itself looks like one. The top bit, which is zhi, is the container holding the coffee. The bao, which means to hold or wrap up, is the body of the machine. The zhen looks like the coffee pouring into the cup, which is the final little component there. I love it. The espresso machine for this is perfect. That's a really good one. And then the final prop suggestion this week was MAKAI ALLBERT on pick a prop for yeah, which is, and he just went with sticky notes because they're little pages, and that's what yeah means. So thank you so much for listening. As always, mandarinblueprint.com, and we'll see you guys next week.